So high performance strategies. First of all, just let me briefly introduce myself. So my background is learning and development, spent lots of time in various corporate roles, but I'm also a chartered psychologist, and I have an unhealthy interest in what motivates people and drives people. So I guess you could say I'm in the right job for that. My day job is CEO of Actus, and I'll just explain what that does in a moment. And I've also got a real interest in change. And I wrote a book on change, and I host the HR Uprising podcast. So if you want to follow up on any of those, we've got lots of links there. And if you're not connected to me on LinkedIn or otherwise, please do connect, because it's always useful to build that network. I do try and post out relatively useful things through LinkedIn. So Actus, just to share what we do, Actus, this is my day job. We provide performance management software, but it's not just performance management. It also offers talent management, 360 survey, learning management, compliance. So it's a comprehensive learning management platform. And as I alluded to previously, I also deliver quite a lot of training because that's my background, and we particularly focus on management training, and recently relaunched something on managing underperformance because it seems to be quite a hot topic. In terms of what we're going to cover in this particular session, it's all about performance. This is the fifth in our series of how-to webinars, and we will send out the slides to you, so anyone who wants to have this to look back on, and the video, so you've got this to refer on. We'll also, when we send it through, we'll make sure that the previous how-to webinar links are there, because you can get these from the website. So we've done other things like how to manage engagement. There's been a series, of course, which they've gone out of my head now as to what the other titles were, but we'll send those links to you. So this is what we're going to look at in terms of high and low performance, evidence-based approaches to performance, something called a Burke Litwin model, which is an organisational development model which reinforces this, and just some tips and practical next steps. So starting off, doing some research, I always try to make sure that we're up to speed with most current research. So I was doing a bit of reading around, and I often end up on the CIPD website. So this is where I took this from the CIPD website. So what they are saying is that productivity, and I appreciate that we have got an international audience here, so it was very UK centric. However, so the UK was stacking up particularly poorly actually against other parts of Europe. So I think Germany was doing better. But they're saying that productivity has slowed down since the financial crash. Lack of management capability was cited as a possible reason by the Bank of England's chief economist. Lots of other things were, like technical things were, but that was the one that we picked out. So things like industries changing and technology issues were also cited. The CIPD, they cite that issues to do with productivity are around organisational culture, performance management or lack of it, and lack of management training. And again, this is an interesting one, given how international you are. I don't know whether this is something that you would consider to be a problem, Steve, in Sydney, or over in Germany, Alex, or in America, Elvis. So I don't know whether you'd say that these are similar problems that you have, but certainly in the UK, we are known for having problems with lack of people management capability and not doing anything about it, and not tending to invest in it. And this seems to be something that's a recurring theme. So if you are going to look at people management strategies, we could look at in a moment, and I'll be looking at the sort of things that evidence suggests that we might want to do. So if that's something that you think you want to improve in your organisation, I'll be sharing the evidence on that. But before I do that, so you think it's much the same, Steve, in Australia, let me put a poll up, because I'm interested to see whether or not you see this as a problem in your own organisations or not. So let me pop this up. Now, this is a question that I asked, this sort of question during COVID about people. And at the time, when everyone was working remotely, the answers were that people felt that they were roughly the same. In fact, some people were even saying they were more productive, but I'm wondering whether that has changed in terms of people, and why that might be if it has changed. So I'm going to give you a chance to participate, and then we'll share the results of this. So about 60% of you have managed to. Please forgive me if I'm sounding a bit bunged up. I am, for some reason. I'm allergic to something in my office. I'm not sure what it is, but I've just been having a bit of a sneezing fit, so apologies for my slight nasal congestion. Okay, I think that's 81% of you have managed to. So let me share this with you. Interesting. So of our audience on here, 50% or more feel that we're now less productive than we were post-COVID. And that is interesting. Now, I've got some personal theories on that. And, you know, half of you also think it's about the same and some are more productive. If you are happy to just pop some in the chat and we'll look at this as we go through, what made you say, if you went for less productive, why do you think that? Is it everybody? Is it something, are people getting fed up, or were they always going to be? Yeah, let us know why you chose that response in the chat, because it will be interesting just to get a feel for this from people. So while you do that, I will move on to my next slide, but as I've got another question to you, I'm just going to give you a moment to think about that. So in terms of your response, if you said less productive, more productive, about the same, what was it that made you choose that? Why do you think that about your organisation? And it takes a while for a bit of it because it's an open question. And because everyone feels a bit more burnt out. So it's on that. I won't ask this question directly, but I've got a sort of theory myself, is that they say about burnout, but then I've part of me thinking, are people just starting to get a bit bored? Because there's a bit less variety. It's a bit more monotonous, I think, if you are in front of the same desk, you know, you're not even having that kind of commute somewhere, or the interaction with different people. Yes. And I recognise your name, Madinal, but what's your first name? Because I think it's M. Adinal, your surname. I'm trying to remember. Mike. Hi, Mike. Thank you. Yes. So interested in these. So yeah. So right. We've got I've got a concierge, Sheffield Knightsbridge concierge. I'm sure that's not your name, but that's where you are in London. For you, it's more productive. The hybrid work from home model is more productivity. And then, yeah, so you can't get it either way. You can't win, can you? There's more there can be distraction from home, and then at work when everyone's too chatty. And maybe it's even more distracting if you are predominantly at home and you go into the office. Maybe there feels like there's more distraction as well, because people haven't seen each other. So it's not the same as if people are in the office, you know, 5 days a week. And I don't know what the solution is. It is just quite interesting to get other opinions here. So for me, I was wondering, in terms of this, I suppose this is the question I'm asking you, what impact do you think, if any, working style, i.e. remote or office, is having or has on performance, given the fact that most of the impact on performance is supposed to be to do with managers or manager style? Is it because people are not being managed, or different types of managed, or maybe there's something different? So that's the thing to explore. So I'll keep an eye on the chat. Do feel free to share your opinions here. And now I'm going to go through some of the evidence, the input aspect of this. So we commissioned a research review. This actually was pre-COVID, but it was looking at the last 50 years worth of research by a professor. And we'll send this out to you, this research review, because it's still really relevant, because it's 50 or 60 years worth of content. And actually, it's the CIPD research that I was citing at the start pretty much draws on the same sort of information, and that was just this year. So I have no reason to think that this has changed dramatically in terms of what makes a difference. So you can read the detail in terms of the papers that we'll send out to you. But the summary was that there were sort of 8 things that actually generate high performance if you look at the history of performance literature. And these 8 things are as follows. So you've got the idea of goal setting. I mean, actually goal setting and feedback, when you look at the literature, is all consistently is the most evidence-based reason to drive high performance. If people don't have goals, if you don't have a culture of clear goal setting, and those goals are aligned with strategic people's roles, but also strategic goals, then you're very unlikely to have a high performance culture or organization. So having goals, getting regular feedback is key. There's then this whole piece about people feeling valued. So people getting feedback so they can perform their best, but also being recognised for high performance. And that could be just verbal recognition. It might be in case of reward that might be linked to it, and you can see reward is also one there, but getting that sense of feedback and recognition from line managers was quite key. Transparent communication. Now, yes, generally transparent communication, you can imagine that that actually leads to a climate of trust, which is that 8th point. But also the way that this transparent communication is talking about is if you have reward allocated in your organisation in relation to pay, then that needs to be done transparently. So people found it demotivating if it was, you know, sort of done in a darkened room. No one really understood how, whether it's reward in terms of pay reviews or whether it was access to development seen as reward. So the processes for these people want to see as transparent. So you could link that to something like a talent management strategy or career pathways for people knowing transparently how they can progress. Coaching and development. Really key is about getting people to take ownership for their own development, for managers to have those coaching skills to move people on and to develop people. So it's making sure that these managers, again, coming down to our managers' skills, that they're able to do this. I touched on strategic alignment, and that really for me fits with goal setting. Reward for performance. Now that's an interesting one because my sense is actually much of the world, if you like, is moving away from performance-related pay. But there were a couple of studies that illustrated that actually people felt that reward should be fairly allocated to performance, and it certainly can drive a level of high performance if managed fairly and transparently. Trained managers. Can't say that enough, making sure that your managers have got the right skills, and not just the right skills, they actually model the right behaviours, because that also leads to a climate of trust where if you're going to give feedback, for example, people don't take feedback from people they either don't respect or don't trust. So again, to develop people to have that high performance organisation, you need to make sure that the manager relationships are positive. So I'm just keeping an eye on the chat, see if anything comes through. It's okay, just someone coming in. So then for you, if a number of you are in HR roles, you might want to think about, well, how can we apply that? It's all very well, those are the things. What can I do to strategically evaluate our organisation and think, is there more that we could do? So this is a Burke Litwin organisational development model. It was designed in 1992, and I came across it at a Roffey Park course I went on. I think it's really quite useful. It helps you sort of identify the drivers for change, and it ranks the performance from the top down. So in theory, it's saying that a lot of things are created by the external environment. So let's say financial crash, cost of living crisis, COVID. A lot of those things are out of our control as organisations. But what we can do is accommodate things within them. And in principle, what Burke Litwin suggests is that the most powerful is at the top, and it flushes down and impacts on the next level. So the purple impacts on the orange, impacts on the grey, and out of it you end up with individual and organisational performance. And you can see different things have different relationships where, of course, you know, you might have a great you might want to have a great organisational culture, but you're going to recognise that culture by the management practices. So if you're trying to demonstrate a culture of trust, but managers are forcing everybody to come in and work in the office and micromanage them, then that's not going to create a positive work climate, and it's going to flow back round and impact your organisational culture. So you can see they do all intersect and web together. So I won't go through each of them in turn, but we'll send this through there. But I'm going to pick on just some of them, I think, there. If I was thinking about this in the context of high performance cultures, then I would want to think, actually, so first of all, strategy. Let me think, do we have a clearly defined organisational strategy? Do people know what our mission is, what our strategic goals are? Because if they don't know what they are, then how can the managers agree good quality goals with their people? And we know that goal setting and feedback against those goals is a driver of high performance. So if we don't actually let people know what high performance looks like from an organisational point of view, how on earth can we line up our individual goals and management practices there, if you think about it? And of course, making sure that those goals are set, that's a leadership piece. In terms of your management practices, so do you have consistent approaches to people management, to performance management? Are they defined in your systems and policies? Do you, or is it inconsistent and the approach differs from manager to manager? So that's where you might look to have a clear policy, let's say, around people performance management reward, and you need to make sure that it supports a positive culture, or the culture that you're looking for, and you want to make sure that the management practices are in line with them. And this comes back to training your managers and actually enforcing their behaviours in line with your stated policies, etc. So hopefully you can see how these sort of fit together, and then it impacts on the individual, which is at that sort of grey level. So if you do have really well-defined reward performance management policies that are really consistently applied, then that's going to create a climate of transparency that should therefore be motivational to people. Hopefully it fits in with individuals' needs and values in terms of what they want to achieve as well, and they have clarity of what the task is, and that's how you end up with high performance. So I share that there, and if anyone's got any questions or comments, please feel free to put them in the chat. But I think it's quite a useful model. You can't just do one thing in isolation because they all knock on to each other. But what you could do if you wanted to in your organisation, think, right, I want to drive high performance, I want to look at it, and you could step back and sort of evaluate each of those aspects in turn. You give yourselves marks out of 10 for it, or identify areas where you could improve in the context of driving a high performance culture. So it's a helpful way of breaking things down, in my opinion, and you can use that as a basis for an HR or an OD strategy, and look behind it. And it just means that you can isolate and break things down more easily that you want to work on, and set yourself HR goals and objectives that are going to drive the business forwards. And then this is another one which is just, for me, a way in which I think you can link together the evidence aspects that we talked about, which is just a little bit simpler. So if you want to look at performance management, you need to make sure that your managers have the right skills to set clear goals. They know the expectations around giving feedback, one-to-ones, regardless of whether people are remote or in person. And you need to make sure that they have the skills and inclination to give good quality feedback and recognition. So that's what we're talking about in terms of performance management. You need to, so it's your sort of processes aspect of it. Then you need to make sure that it's quality, so that whatever it is that you've asked them to do, they're carrying them out in a consistent fashion. It's not just pockets for some people and not for others, because that's going to develop a culture of trust in terms of this. Oh, thank you, Steph. That's great. Really helpful. I love this when people are helping out, sharing information in the chat. Please feel free. That's great. And then it ends up, and you're going to end up with something which is a high performance culture, which is kind of intangible. It's an output, your high performance culture. And this is why, if you want to drive that, it's thinking, what are the things we need to do, the levers that we can drive in our organisation that are going to drive that. So those are the thoughts in terms of some of the evidence. As I say, we'll send you resources. Steph's popped an article in about Burke Litwin as well, which you can use. Then I've got some questions which I thought were just pondering questions, if you like, that I was considering myself, just to put up here. And I'm going to put these up as a poll for you. Let me go back. Right. So there's actually 3 questions on this. I'm just curious again. I thought it was a way of capturing lots of thoughts, but again, if you want to put it in the chat, you can, but because we've got quite a big group on here, it's often easier to grab it here. So these are just questions that I'm pondering on. I don't know the answer. There's not an official answer to them, which is why it's useful to get other people's sense. So for me, is work-life balance still an issue, or are people working work-life fluidity? Enjoying that. So work-life fluidity, according to, I think it was the CIPD, or maybe it was HR Grapevine, was saying that this is where actually it works really well for people, because they just are able to weave their home life and their work life, often digitally, around together. So actually it works well for them, and people are comfortable with that, maybe ambiguity, as opposed to needing it to be sectioned. We touched on that before. Is overwork and burnout still a risk, or have people moved to more of a quiet monotony where the energy is there? Do we need more people to return to the office more, in your opinion, in the terms of that? And I haven't asked this question, but for me, I was thinking, if it is about energy or monotony, if managers didn't have the skills previously to manage performance, how on earth are they going to get that subtlety of managing energy levels and tapping into that? There's more of a rhetorical type question. So well done, 80% of you have answered. So let me end this and share the results. Let's see what you think. Wow. So we're definitely not decided, are we, on these? So is work-life balance still an issue? Yes, for some, no for some, and not sure. So it might be some. So it depends answer, isn't it? And maybe that means that people should work. Are energy levels, monotony, a risk for home workers in your view? Quite a few of you. And so maybe, so that feels like we're all thinking possibly it is. Ideas about that? Here's a question for the chat. Any of you, if you do think that's an issue, what do you think we should do about it? How can we do that? I mean, I know that in our organisation, more people are wanting to have, we're now totally remote, but more people are asking for the opportunity to do face-to-face. They don't want to be in an office every day, but they work in a co-working space some of the time, whatever the right frequency is for them. And I think it's that gives you a bit of that variety, almost looking forward to seeing people. But should there be other things? And again, we've got a real split. Should more people return to the office more of the time? Half and half. I guess it probably does depend on the person, the role, level of motivation, management style, things we've talked about before as well, maybe levels of experience. So if anyone wants to add any context, do please feel free to. Oh, sorry, I've just put it forward. I didn't mean to go that. Please feel free to. Thoughts on that? Right, so I'm just going to leave that, stop sharing. Let's see what we're saying here. Hybrid. Yeah, so the whole hybrid works for you there. Some in the office, some at home, keeps the variety and keeps your energy levels more stable. But also, yes, that is a very good point. It is also quite monotonous to commute, isn't it? So you don't necessarily want to be sitting, in traffic or on a train every day of the week. So that in itself isn't necessarily something people want. Now I've got one more poll. So if we link back to when I was saying about the earlier points here about what we think the key areas for high performance might be, just to help you reflect in terms of that. So we talked about these 8 key areas as to how we generate high performance. If you were to think of your business, and if you're going to apply Burke Litwin, which do you think you want to improve or could improve in your business? Now, this poll has been launched in this meeting. Hang on, I've got to unlaunch something. Not sure why it's saying that. Stop sharing. There we go. So if you were to choose this, and you can choose more than one if you want, I'm intrigued. These are the sort of things that if you were to put in place a high performance strategy in your organisation, which areas would you focus in on? And you can choose more than one. So would it be about better strategic alignment? Is it making sure people do more feedback? Is it a combination? What sort of things do you think you might, if you're putting in place your strategy, want to work on? So what Mike's got to say here. Yeah, that's right, isn't it, Mike? So that's we are 100% there. We don't have an office, but I think sometimes people still need to get together and co-work. So it's making sure we still facilitate those things and put them in. It does depend on the role. Okay, so I'll give you 5 seconds for anyone else wants to answer. I know there's quite a lot there to digest in terms of this one. And I'm going to end it. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. End. And here. So the top choice is better trained people managers. And actually, I suppose flowing out of that is developing a coaching culture, because to do that, we're going to have to make sure that our managers can coach. Then improved communication and trust. That's an interesting one, isn't it? So you need to do that, but how do you do that? That's such, and improve recognition and feedback. So it is kind of that flow of communication. So if you want to think about how can you do that, is that something where you've really got to engage the senior leaders to lead from the top in terms of that? Think about what things you can do in terms of levers for recognition and feedback. why did we move to 100% remote working? Well, we're only a small team, there's only 12 of us, and we weren't using our offices at all. So people weren't coming in during COVID. So it was a sort of, everyone seemed to be happier or perfectly happy working remotely, and the use, and therefore it wasn't a sensible financial cost to do that. But now I do put a budget aside for the people who want to go and do a day every couple of weeks in a sort of co-working space, but it's only a day, a couple of days a month at the moment. Yeah, that's it. That's what we are doing in terms of Knightsbridge concierge. That's what we're doing. But I do feel that you then become quite comfortable being at your desk, if you like, and there is a bit of monotony potentially, and you don't break the monotony with work people necessarily. I mean, so it's fine. You can go and I go out, I can go and have a game of tennis or walk the dog or something like that and take a break, but it's not necessarily taking a break with people that I work with, which is possibly a missed opportunity in terms of energy. But that said, we also still do virtual meetings, and I was just wondering about bringing back social stuff and just making sure that there are things that are a little bit varied, a little bit interesting. But then, you see, I have a personal driver for variety. So not everybody does that. So that's why I suppose I'm querying it. So please feel free to share in the chat anything that anyone else has that, that they feel about this. So then my final so yeah, I agree with that, Emma. I think that does make a difference if you know what you're doing and you kind of established. Whereas I think if you're starting out in your career, it's really helpful to have that stimulation and other things. So my final slide really was just sort of some practical takeaways that you could think about if you want to improve performance based on, what's the e-PDR saying we should do, etc. Definitely looking at the capability of your people managers. Make sure that you consider that, and when you're considering that development, focus them on these higher productivity practices. So make sure people know how to set good goals and objectives, provide feedback, give clarity. Consider whether or not you want to look at how your reward strategy works. And if you do want to think about performance related pay, we have a white paper on that. I know it's not necessarily that trendy, but there are certain things you should do if you are going to introduce something like that. For example, make sure that it's managed, you have a calibration process so that it's fairly managed. I'd also say, why not have a look at the Burke Litwin model? And I think we've got a nice little handout, and if we have, it'll come on the email that you'll get from my colleague Caitlin later. Consider whether or not people feel balanced, work-life balance, fluidity. Consider revisiting working practice locations. Are they working? And, are people burnt out or are they bored? So when I'm saying consider, maybe it's talk to people, get a sense, is there a different feel? The thing that's got me thinking about this actually in the first place was I did my first bit of face-to-face training in 4 years last week. And I was running a course on underperformance, managing underperformance for a large business school actually. And whereas historically, when I've run those sort of training programs, you take these scenarios, I get people to share the scenarios of underperformance, and it was more traditional, people breaking policies, not quite being drunk at work or hitting somebody, but it was more overt underperformance type things. Whereas almost all the scenarios that people were coming up with were really subtle. So I was saying things like, Jane used to be a really high performer, and is now just a moderate performer. So they're not really underperforming, but you feel like they're underperforming for them. So their performance has dropped, but it's not it's a hard thing to manage. And so there were lots of really subtle, nuanced underperformance bases, which people really didn't quite know how to manage. And that was what got me thinking is, has underperformance changed in terms of this? I don't know whether that is the case or not, which it's always worth asking, isn't it, as you notice these subtleties. And we're lucky because I, Touch Base had a chance to have a big group of you like we have today, so you can get those opinions and see whether there's a bit of a theme going on. So I shared that and reflect it back to you to see whether that theme might resonate in your organisation or whether it's not a theme at all. So those are some practical steps for you. And just finishing there, please let us know if there's anything that you think you're going to do. The information will come out for you. The slides and the information will get sent out to whichever email address you registered for this with. They'll be sent out to you later on today. So they'll come out probably from my colleague Caitlin. We are just about to look at our future webinars. We've just come to the end of this one, but if any of you want to know more about Actus, performance management software, which obviously can underpin something. We've got an open demo, so you'd be able to sign up for that. And also, if you want to know more about the training that we're doing more of now, it tends to be in organisation training, but we may launch some open programs. Then you also feel free to make it known if you want to know more about that as well. I'm just trying to put that poll up, which is saying that you can make it easy for you if you want to know more. If you want us to come back to you and do this, and sorry, I'm touching to it, then I should be able to launch this. Zoom's playing around. I tell you what, just message us if you want to. Normally I put a final poll up and say if you want to us to come back to you on anything, please let us know. You can just respond to the email when it comes out. So if you want to know more about the training programs that I'm running, or any other aspect of Actus, or sign up for the demo, then please feel free. And if anyone's got any questions or anything like that, then do feel free to stay on the call or pop them in the chat. Thank you so much for joining. Yeah, I really like, George, I really like the Burke Litwin model. I think it's really useful. It's great for like an OD strategy. If you wanted to build an OD strategy, it's really useful. Thank you for the feedback. Thank you for joining. I'm just going to close this now.